The darkness of space stretched infinitely, broken only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Among this eternal night, the void was never truly silent. The soundless hum of engines, the creak of metal under pressure, and the soft whirring of advanced technologies permeated the vast emptiness. But something new, something unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, had arrived. The warships of the Voidborn, a faction shrouded in secrecy, had emerged from the uncharted regions of deep space. These massive vessels, sleek and menacing, were unlike anything the known galaxy had ever created. Their outer hulls shimmered with a dark, iridescent sheen, while intricate energy shields pulsed in an eerie glow. The ships carried with them the terrifying knowledge that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift. At the helm of one of these colossal ships stood Admiral Kalen, a figure whose name would become legend. His eyes, a deep shade of crimson, gleamed with determination and a ruthless ambition. He had led his people for centuries, and under his command, the Voidborn fleet had become an unstoppable force. Yet even he felt the weight of what lay ahead. This war was unlike any other. They were not merely fighting for survival, they were fighting for destiny. The fleet's arrival at the edge of the Helosian expanse was no accident. The expanse was a strategic choke point, a narrow passageway between two vast sectors of the galaxy. Whoever controlled it controlled the flow of resources, trade, and power. For years, the established powers of the galaxy, the Dominion of Solara, the Zether Conclave, and the Unity of Ardent Suns, had warred over it, but none had ever truly claimed it. The expanse was too dangerous, filled with anomalies and hostile forces, but that was exactly why Kalen's fleet had come. The Voidborn had no fear of the unknown. They thrived in it. The first attack came without warning. A Dominion patrol ship, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the fleet, attempted to flee. But it was no use. The Voidborn warships, with their unparalleled speed and firepower, tore through the Dominion vessel like a blade through paper. The transmission sent by the ship's final moments echoed in the minds of those who heard it, a desperate, terrified message: "The Voidborn are here. We are too late." Admiral Kalen stood at the bridge of his command ship, his eyes narrowing as he watched the destruction unfold on the holodisplay. His fleet moved in unison, a well-oiled machine of destruction. Each ship, each soldier, each commander moved with purpose. But there was something more, something in the air that made this battle different from all others. It was the quiet before the storm, the weight of destiny hanging over them. His first officer, Commander Ilara, stood by his side, her face pale. "Admiral," she began, her voice steady but tinged with unease, "this is only the beginning. The Dominion will retaliate and the others will come. The galaxy will not bow easily." Kalen's gaze did not waver. "Let them come," he said, his voice cold. "This war has always been inevitable. The time for negotiations has passed. We are not here to ask for control, we are here to seize it." Behind them, the vast fleet of Voidborn warships continued their advance. Hundreds of ships, each more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen, poured into the expanse. The dark metal of the warships reflected the starlight in a haunting display of power. But amidst the fearsome presence of the fleet, there was a quiet confidence. The Voidborn had been preparing for this moment for generations, and now it was time to reshape the galaxy's future. As the battle raged across the expanse, Kalen's mind raced. He knew that this war would change everything. But there was more at play here than the domination of space. The Voidborn were fighting not just for territory or resources. They were fighting for the very essence of the universe, to challenge an ancient and mysterious force that had shaped the fate of all sentient life for eons. And that was a war that would span across the stars, a war in which every move, every battle, every life lost would bring them closer to the ultimate prize, the ability to reshape the destiny of all. As the Dominion sent their fleets in waves to retaliate, Kalen stood resolute. He was prepared for the sacrifices, prepared for the loss, and prepared for what was to come. The warships of the Voidborn were more than just weapons of war. They were harbingers of the galaxy's new future, where the old powers would crumble and a new order would rise. The first strike had been made. The path to victory had been set. The endless war had begun. The void between stars was cold, but the heart of the Helosian expanse was ablaze with chaos. After the Voidborn's devastating attack on the Dominion patrol, a tide of retaliation crashed across the region. The once quiet corridors of space were now teeming with the aftermath of conflict: scattered debris, the twisted wreckage of fallen ships, and the eerie silence of ships that had yet to react to the devastating threat. Admiral Kalen surveyed the destruction from the bridge of his flagship, Vortex Reaver, as it drifted between the burning remains of the Dominion patrol fleet. Their ships, some of the most advanced in the galaxy, were nothing but smoldering carcasses. The Voidborn had struck fast, their superior weaponry and tactics leaving no room for mercy. Commander Ilara stepped up beside Kalen, her expression unreadable as she observed the carnage. The Dominion will rally their forces, but they won't be able to match our strength. She was certain of that. The Voidborn fleet was a finely tuned machine, each ship a work of art, crafted for destruction and designed to operate with deadly precision. Let them try, Kalen replied, his voice soft but carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. The true storm is yet to come. We've made our mark. Now we'll see who dares to face us. Despite their overwhelming strength, Kalen knew that this war would not be decided by sheer might alone. The Voidborn were no mere conquerors, they were architects of fate. The galaxy's powers had long ruled with an iron grip, and the Voidborn were here to shatter that grip, to cast aside the old order and forge a new path. The Dominion's retaliation came within hours. A massive fleet, comprising dozens of battleships and cruisers, arrived at the edge of the expanse, its intent clear: revenge. The Dominion, a vast empire of human-like beings, had long dominated the sector with an iron fist. Yet, despite their military prowess, they were unprepared for the Voidborn's advanced technologies and ruthless strategies. The Dominion fleet opened fire first, the unmistakable pulse of their weapons lancing across the void. But the Voidborn were already moving, their warships gliding through space like shadows, evading the incoming fire with ease. Kalen's fleet struck back with terrifying speed, their weapons lancing through Dominion shields, cracking their hulls open like eggshells. "Send in the Dread Wolves," Kalen ordered coldly, his voice a command that brooked no argument. The Dread Wolves were elite fighter pilots, trained to outmaneuver the fastest ships in the galaxy. They were known for their speed, stealth, and deadly precision. In the blink of an eye, they launched from the Vortex Reaver, streaking into the battle with unmatched agility. The small, sleek ships darted through the Dominion lines, raining laser fire on the enemy with surgical precision. Ilara watched the scene unfold, her hand tightening around the railing. They won't stop. Not after this. Kalen's crimson eyes gleamed with a dangerous spark. This is just the beginning. The Dominion will try to fight back, but they won't be able to keep up. What comes next will be far worse for them. We are the harbingers of change, and this galaxy is ripe for it. As the Voidborn fleet tore through the Dominion ranks, one of their ships, a massive dreadnought named Eclipse of Solara, launched a desperate counterattack. It was a behemoth of steel, built for sustained bombardment, and its weapons were capable of leveling entire fleets with a single salvo. "That's their best," Ilara said, her voice laced with distaste. "An entire dreadnought, and still we advance without breaking a sweat." Kalen's expression remained unchanged. "They think they can defeat us with brute force. They are mistaken." The Eclipse of Solara fired its main cannon, the energy blast arcing toward Kalen's flagship. But before it could make contact, the Vortex Reaver's shields flared to life, absorbing the impact with a barely audible hum. Within moments, the Voidborn fleet had closed the gap, and the Eclipse of Solara was surrounded on all sides. "End it," Kalen ordered. In a final, decisive move, the Voidborn unleashed their greatest weapon, the Nightfall Pulse. A devastating energy wave that disrupted enemy electronics, shattering systems and disintegrating shields. The Eclipse of Solara was torn apart within seconds, its massive frame shuddering as it crumpled under the onslaught. Ilara breathed a sigh of relief. They won't be sending any more reinforcements. Kalen looked to the horizon of stars, his gaze fixed and unwavering. The Dominion is broken for now, but the real fight is yet to come. We haven't even begun to challenge the others. The galaxy was not just watching, it was waiting. The Voidborn's assault had sent a ripple through the power structures of the universe. While some feared their unrelenting advance, others saw a glimmer of opportunity. The old order was crumbling, and the fate of the galaxy was in the balance. But there were forces beyond Kalen's understanding, forces that had lingered for millennia, manipulating the threads of fate. These powers were not content with mere conquest. They had their own designs, and their goals might align, or clash, with the Voidborn's. The galaxy was on the cusp of a new era, but whether it would rise from the ashes or burn to the ground was a question only the coming storm would answer. As the Voidborn fleet moved deeper into the expanse, Kalen couldn't help but feel a stirring in the depths of his mind. The battle for the galaxy had only just begun, and there was no turning back. The star systems around the Helosian expanse were burning. The Dominion's attempt at retaliation had faltered, and in the wake of their humiliation, a ripple of uncertainty spread throughout the galaxy. Across countless worlds, war councils were convened, and emissaries from the great powers scrambled to determine how best to respond to the rise of the Voidborn. Yet there was one power that had remained silent in the shadows, watching, calculating, waiting. Deep within the outermost reaches of known space, the Zethar Conclave, an ancient coalition of telepathic beings, had sensed the disturbance. The Conclave's existence was a mystery to many, their long-standing influence often hidden beneath layers of secrecy and subtle manipulation. They had no desire for physical conquest, but their command of the mind was absolute. They could shape thoughts, control movements, and influence entire civilizations without ever firing a single shot. High in their citadel on the crystal planet of Xanthoria, the Zethar Council convened. The long, translucent corridors were filled with an eerie, almost oppressive silence. The members of the council, their elongated forms suspended in chambers of pure thought, communicated without speaking. Their minds were as one, bound by a collective consciousness forged over millennia. At the head of the council sat Seraphis, the oldest and most powerful of the Zethar. His silver eyes glowed with a faint, otherworldly light. As the council's leader, he was tasked with keeping the balance of power in the galaxy, ensuring that no one force grew too powerful. It was a role he had performed countless times before, and he knew that the Voidborn posed a threat unlike any he had encountered. "The Voidborn," Seraphis murmured, his thoughts rippling out to the minds of his fellow counselors. "They are not of our making. They are something else. A disruption. A force beyond our control." Another voice, that of Ithra, the council's youngest member, echoed in the chamber. "But they are not invincible. The Dominion's fleet was decimated. The others will follow suit." Seraphis's mind flared with sudden intensity. "It is not their strength I fear. It is what they are after." The room fell silent as the Zethar considered his words. The Voidborn were not like the other empires, violent yet predictable. They sought to reshape the very fabric of the galaxy, to tear down the old order and establish their own vision. But there was something deeper beneath their plans, something far more dangerous. Something that could unravel the very threads of existence itself. Far from the halls of the Zethar, Kalen's fleet continued its advance into the expanse. With each victory, the fear and uncertainty among the galaxy's powers grew. The Dominion had suffered a crushing defeat, but the Zethar were watching closely, calculating the risks of direct confrontation. The Unity of Ardent Sons, a coalition of religiously zealous humans, began assembling a defensive fleet. Yet they too were cautious. The Zethar had long held sway over their minds, and their influence had caused many to hesitate. They knew that a single misstep could send the entire galaxy spiraling into chaos. Kalen, however, was unshaken. On the bridge of his flagship Vortex Reaver, he surveyed the reports from the front lines. His fleet was expanding, the victory over the Dominion providing them with critical resources and morale. Their next target, the resource-rich planets of the Ardent Sons. But Kalen was not focused solely on conquest. The Voidborn had something more than warships at their disposal, ancient relics, long-forgotten technologies that had been hidden away for centuries. It was these secrets that Kalen sought to uncover, for they held the key to shaping the future of the galaxy. Ilara stood beside Kalen, her brow furrowed as she scanned the incoming intelligence reports. "Admiral, we've intercepted a series of encrypted communications. It seems the Zethar are beginning to stir. They are aware of our presence." Kalen's gaze sharpened. The Zethar were dangerous in ways that could not be underestimated. Their telepathic abilities could shape minds, twist allegiances, and sabotage plans from within. If they had chosen to oppose the Voidborn, it would be a far more insidious battle than anything they had yet faced. "We need to make a decision," Ilara continued. "If they move against us, it could spell disaster." Kalen remained silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the map of stars on the holographic display in front of him. "We will not wait for them to make their move. We strike first." "Where?" Ilara asked, intrigued but cautious. "To Xanthoria," Kalen said, his voice firm. "The Zethar may be able to see our every move, but they cannot anticipate one thing: the Voidborn will not be cowed by fear. If they wish to challenge us, we will take the fight to them." The decision was made. A fleet of elite Voidborn warships, led by Kalen's own flagship, was sent on a covert mission to infiltrate the heart of Zethar space. They would breach the defensive shields surrounding Xanthoria and land on the crystal planet's surface. But they would not just be fighting an enemy with weapons, they would be fighting an enemy that could invade their very thoughts, twist their perceptions, and force them to question everything they knew. In the depths of space, Amid the glow of distant stars, the Void-born warships moved into position. Their weapons remained silent, their engines purring like the stalking of a great predator. And as Kalen prepared for the coming confrontation, a strange sensation washed over him, a feeling that he was being watched. Not by the enemy but by something, or someone, far older. The galaxy's fate had already been set into motion. The endless war had taken on a new, darker hue, and Kalen knew that the real struggle for the future had only just begun. As his fleet neared Xanthoria's orbit, the silent weight of impending conflict loomed larger than ever. But Kalen would not be deterred. The battle for the galaxy was not just about power, it was about reshaping its very destiny. And the Voidborn would stop at nothing to see that vision realized. The hidden hand had already moved. The galaxy's true war was only beginning. The approach to Xanthoria was unlike any other. As Kalen's flagship, Vortex Reaver, pierced the dense nebula that surrounded the crystal planet, an unnatural silence enveloped the fleet. The usual hum of engines and the rhythmic clamor of the crew seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness that settled over the warships. The Voidborn had faced many adversaries but none like this. The Xether were not just a physical enemy, they were a force that could shape the very thoughts of those who dared to face them. Commander Ilara stood at Kalen's side, her sharp eyes scanning the flickering holographic display as it updated with data. The planet Xanthoria glowed like a jewel in the vast emptiness of space, a world of shining crystal spires and reflective surfaces. To the untrained eye, it seemed a peaceful, serene world. But beneath its beauty lay the vast citadel of the Xether, a fortress of thought and will that had existed for millennia. "I can feel it," Ilara muttered, her voice strained. "They are already aware of us." Kalen's gaze remained fixed on the planet's surface, his expression unreadable. "Their minds are powerful, but they are not invincible," he said, his voice calm but laced with the certainty that only a leader who had seen countless battles could possess. A chill ran down Ilara's spine. She had been a soldier for years, hardened by the Voidborn's relentless campaigns, but the Xether were something different. Their telepathic powers could breach minds, twist memories, and drive even the strongest warriors to madness. It was not just a war of weapons, it was a war for the soul. Suddenly the stillness broke. A wave of psychic energy, sharp, piercing, and impossibly vast, washed over the fleet. The Voidborn, known for their mental resilience, were still not immune. Ilara felt it first, a surge of oppressive thoughts that seemed to invade every corner of her consciousness. For a brief moment she thought she could hear voices, whispers of ancient beings, speaking in a language she could not understand. Her grip tightened on the console as she fought to maintain control, pushing back against the mental assault. "Admiral, we're being pulled," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Their influence is overwhelming." Kalen's crimson eyes glowed with a deadly focus as he stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "The Xether think they can bend us to their will. But they do not understand the strength of the Voidborn. We will not be broken." He reached out and pressed a series of buttons on the command console. On the bridge, the lights flickered as the fleet's psychic shields activated, creating a barrier against the Xether's invasive influence. It was not a perfect defense, but it was enough. The psychic wave's intensity lessened, though it still gnawed at the edges of their minds, like a persistent whisper just out of reach. The fleet continued to move forward, now deep within Xanthoria's orbit, each ship maintaining its course toward the heart of the planet. The Xether's defenses were formidable, but Kalen had come prepared. His plan was not to engage them in their domain of thought, but to strike where they were weakest. "We land on the surface," Kalen declared, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. "We fight where their telepathic influence is weakest, among the ruins of their old city. We will show them that the Voidborn will never bow." Ilara nodded, her unease tempered by the steely resolve that Kalen exuded. They would land and engage the Xether on their own terms, in the ancient city at the heart of Xanthoria, where the crystals pulsed with an energy older than the galaxy itself. If the Xether were to break their mental stranglehold, they would need to fight at the very source of their power. The fleet descended through the planet's atmosphere, a storm of dark warships breaking through the clouds, descending toward the spires and crystal towers of Xanthoria. The city below seemed almost alive, its crystalline structures vibrating with an energy that hummed through the very air. The Xether were prepared, their defenses shimmered, creating walls of energy that rippled like water. But the Voidborn were undeterred. As the fleet's ground forces descended upon the ancient city, the Xether began to mobilize. Strange, otherworldly ships, transparent and glimmering, emerged from the depths of the city, their psionic engines creating ripples in the air that threatened to tear at the fabric of space itself. These ships were not built for conventional combat. They were extensions of the Zethers' minds, an unholy fusion of technology and telepathic power. But Kalen was not afraid. The Void-born warships were equipped with disruptors, technological marvels that could counteract psionic energies. The battle was about to enter a new phase. A battle not only for the future of the galaxy, but for the very nature of reality itself. On the ground, Kalen's elite soldiers, known as the Night Reapers, began their assault on the city. They were soldiers like no others, trained not just in the arts of war, but in the art of resisting mental manipulation. As they stormed through the streets of Xanthoria, their bodies clad in dark, reinforced armor, they could feel the pressure of the Zethers' thoughts pressing down upon them. The air seemed thick with the weight of ancient minds, but the Night Reapers pushed forward, their resolve unwavering. Ilara, Kalen's voice came through her calm, we need to locate the heart of their power. Find the core of Xanthoria. We take it and we sever their influence. Ilara nodded, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the city from above. The Zether had built their stronghold around a massive crystal at the center of the city, an ancient relic that pulsed with energy. She knew that if they could destroy it, the Zethers' telepathic grip would collapse. As she and her team moved toward the core, the ground beneath them trembled. The Zether were not going down without a fight. Dark shadows flitted between the crystal spires, and the air itself seemed to warp around them. Suddenly, a burst of psychic energy surged through Ilara's mind. She saw a vision, strange, fleeting images of worlds burning, of stars dying. In the distance, she could hear the laughter of a voice she had never heard, yet somehow knew. A voice filled with ancient power. It was not the Zether. It was something else. Something older. Admiral, there's more at play here, Ilara's voice cracked as she sent the message. Kalen's response was cold, but with a hint of realization. The true enemy is not the Zether. We are being manipulated, and we are walking right into it. As the battle raged around them, the Voidborn began to understand that this war was no longer just about defeating their enemies, it was about uncovering the shadows that lurked behind them, pulling the strings of fate itself. And in the heart of Xanthoria, those shadows were beginning to take shape. The approach to Xanthoria was unlike any other. As Kalen's flagship, Vortex Reaver, pierced the dense nebula that surrounded the crystal planet, an unnatural silence enveloped the fleet. The usual hum of engines and the rhythmic clamor of the crew seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness that settled over the warships. The Voidborn had faced many adversaries but none like this. The Zether were not just a physical enemy, they were a force that could shape the very thoughts of those who dared to face them. Commander Ilara stood at Kalen's side, her sharp eyes scanning the flickering holographic display as it updated with data. The planet Xanthoria glowed like a jewel in the vast emptiness of space, a world of shining crystal spires and reflective surfaces. To the untrained eye, it seemed a peaceful, serene world. But beneath its beauty lay the vast citadel of the Zether, a fortress of thought and will that had existed for millennia. I can feel it, Ilara muttered, her voice strained. They are already aware of us. Kalen's gaze remained fixed on the planet's surface, his expression unreadable. Their minds are powerful, but they are not invincible, he said, his voice calm but laced with the certainty that only a leader who had seen countless battles could possess. A chill ran down Ilara's spine. She had been a soldier for years, hardened by the Voidborn's relentless campaigns, but the Zether were something different. Their telepathic powers could breach minds, twist memories, and drive even the strongest warriors to madness. It was not just a war of weapons, it was a war for the soul. Suddenly the stillness broke. A wave of psychic energy, sharp, piercing, and impossibly vast, washed over the fleet. The Voidborn, known for their mental resilience, were still not immune. Ilara felt it first, a surge of oppressive thoughts that seemed to invade every corner of her consciousness. For a brief moment she thought she could hear voices, whispers of ancient beings, speaking in a language she could not understand. Her grip tightened on the console as she fought to maintain control, pushing back against the mental assault. Admiral, we're being pulled, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Their influence is overwhelming. Kalen's crimson eyes glowed with a deadly focus as he stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. The Zether think they can bend us to their will. But they do not understand the strength of the Voidborn. We will not be broken. He reached out and pressed a series of buttons on the command console. On the bridge, the lights flickered as the fleet's psychic shields activated, creating a barrier against the Zether's invasive influence. It was not a perfect defense, but it was enough. The psychic wave's intensity lessened, though it still gnawed at the edges of their minds, like a persistent whisper just out of reach. The fleet continued to move forward, now deep within Xanthoria's orbit, each ship maintaining its course toward the heart of the planet. The Zethers' defenses were formidable, but Kalen had come prepared. His plan was not to engage them in their domain of thought, but to strike where they were weakest. "We land on the surface," Kalen declared, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. "We fight where their telepathic influence is weakest, among the ruins of their old city. We will show them that the Voidborn will never bow." Ilara nodded, her unease tempered by the steely resolve that Kalen exuded. They would land and engage the Zether on their own terms, in the ancient city at the heart of Xanthoria, where the crystals pulsed with an energy older than the galaxy itself. If the Zether were to break their mental stranglehold, they would need to fight at the very source of their power. The fleet descended through the planet's atmosphere, a storm of dark warships breaking through the clouds, descending toward the spires and crystal towers of Xanthoria. The city below seemed almost alive, its crystalline structures vibrating with an energy that hummed through the very air. The Zether were prepared, their defenses shimmered, creating walls of energy that rippled like water. But the Voidborn were undeterred. As the fleet's ground forces descended upon the ancient city, the Zether began to mobilize. Strange, otherworldly ships, transparent and glimmering, emerged from the depths of the city, their psionic engines creating ripples in the air that threatened to tear at the fabric of space itself. These ships were not built for conventional combat. They were extensions of the Zethers' minds, an unholy fusion of technology and telepathic power. But Kalen was not afraid. The Voidborn warships were equipped with disruptors, technological marvels that could counteract psionic energies. The battle was about to enter a new phase. A battle not only for the future of the galaxy, but for the very nature of reality itself. On the ground, Kalen's elite soldiers, known as the Night Reapers, began their assault on the city. They were soldiers like no others, trained not just in the arts of war, but in the art of resisting mental manipulation. As they stormed through the streets of Xanthoria, their bodies clad in dark, reinforced armor, they could feel the pressure of the Zethers' thoughts pressing down upon them. The air seemed thick with the weight of ancient minds, but the Night Reapers pushed forward, their resolve unwavering. "Ilara," Kalen's voice came through her calm, "we need to locate the heart of their power. Find the core of Xanthoria. We take it and we sever their influence." Ilara nodded, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the city from above. The Zether had built their stronghold around a massive crystal at the center of the city, an ancient relic that pulsed with energy. She knew that if they could destroy it, the Zethers' telepathic grip would collapse. As she and her team moved toward the core, the ground beneath them trembled. The Zether were not going down without a fight. Dark shadows flitted between the crystal spires, and the air itself seemed to warp around them. Suddenly, a burst of psychic energy surged through Ilara's mind. She saw a vision, strange, fleeting images of worlds burning, of stars dying. In the distance, she could hear the laughter of a voice she had never heard, yet somehow knew. A voice filled with ancient power. It was not the Zether. It was something else. Something older. "Admiral, there's more at play here," Ilara's voice cracked as she sent the message. Kalen's response was cold, but with a hint of realization. The true enemy is not the Zether. We are being manipulated, and we are walking right into it. As the battle raged around them, the Voidborn began to understand that this war was no longer just about defeating their enemies, it was about uncovering the shadows that lurked behind them, pulling the strings of fate itself. And in the heart of Xanthoria, those shadows were beginning to take shape. Xanthoria's crystal spires had fallen, shattered by the unstoppable force that had awoken from within the core. As the ground cracked and the sky darkened, the ancient city was consumed by an expanding storm of darkness. Kalen stood at the helm of the Vortex Reaver, watching the destruction unfold. His fleet hovered above the planet, ready for battle, but what could they do against an enemy that existed beyond the stars, beyond even time itself? The voice of the ancient entity echoed in his mind, cold and insistent, like the crashing of 1,000 storms. It was not merely speaking, it was reshaping the very fabric of reality, twisting the known universe into something unrecognizable. He could feel its power stretching out like an ocean, drowning all that it touched. "You cannot defeat me, Kalen of the Voidborn. You cannot even understand me. This galaxy, this universe, is mine to unmake. And when I am done, there will be nothing left but darkness." Kalen's grip tightened on the command console, his mind racing as he tried to process the enormity of the threat. The Voidborn had faced many dangers, but this was something beyond anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't just an enemy they could fight with weapons, it was a force of pure entropy, capable of unmaking the very structure of the universe. We have to stop it. Ilara's voice broke through the haze of chaos, urgent but steady. The Zethar kept this entity imprisoned for a reason. They were the only ones who understood the danger. Kalen's gaze turned to the holographic display in front of him. The planet was dying before his eyes. The core of Xanthoria was no longer a single, contained energy source. It had become a nexus of destruction, a focal point for the entity's dark influence. If the Voidborn were to survive, they needed to act fast. They needed to destroy the core, but it wasn't just about physical destruction anymore. The entity was far more than a simple prison break. It was trying to tear apart the very foundation of reality. "Where is Ilara?" Kalen demanded, his voice tense. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the ground team," a communications officer responded quickly. "We're unable to establish a stable link." Kalen's heart clenched. He knew Ilara was in the heart of Xanthoria, deep inside the very core that was now destroying everything. She was no stranger to danger, but this was different. Even she, with all her skill and strength, might not be enough to survive the storm that was brewing on the surface. "I'm going in," Kalen declared. "Prepare a team. We're going to find her." The Vortex Reaver plunged into Xanthoria's atmosphere, its engines roaring as the ship tore through the sky. The fleet followed, their warships shadowing him as they descended into the storm that had consumed the planet. The very air seemed to twist as if the laws of physics no longer applied. A rift in space itself was opening above them, and Kalen knew they were running out of time. As the ship landed amidst the ruined city, the darkness closed in around them. The city was no longer a place of beauty, it was a twisted nightmare. The once pristine crystal structures were now darkened and malformed, pulsing with an eerie, unnatural glow. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sound of distant wails echoed through the air. "Ilara." Kalen's voice rang out, his every step careful as he moved through the crumbling streets. His men flanked him, their weapons drawn, but nothing they carried would stop the entity that had risen. They were walking into the heart of the storm. The ground suddenly cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, figures emerged. They were not Zethar. They were something else entirely. Dark, shadowy forms that seemed to shift and ripple in the air. The nightmarish shapes surrounded them, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly malice. Kalen's instincts kicked in. He raised his hand, signaling for his team to open fire. But the shadows were too quick, dissipating and reforming in a flurry of movement. The Voidborn soldiers fought valiantly, but they were fighting against more than just flesh and bone. These were not enemies, they were fragments of the entity itself, extensions of its will brought to life by its power. "Move forward," Kalen ordered. He couldn't afford to be distracted by these creatures. The mission was to find Ilara and stop the core no matter the cost. As they pushed deeper into the city, Kalen's mind reeled with the enormity of what was happening. The entity, the being that had awoken, was older than the universe itself. It had shaped the cosmos in its image before, and now it sought to unmake it all. If it succeeded, the entire galaxy would be swallowed by the void, its stars snuffed out one by one. Finally, Kalen and his team reached the central chamber, the epicenter of the storm. The core stood before them, now pulsating with dark energy. Ilara lay at its base, her body slumped against one of the cracked crystal pillars. She was alive but barely. "Ilara." Kalen rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes flickering as she struggled to focus on him. "Admiral," she whispered, her voice weak. It's worse than we thought." Kalen helped her to her feet, his heart pounding as he looked around the chamber. The shadows pressed in from all sides, and the dark figure that had emerged from the core now stood at its center. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a towering presence, a being made of living darkness, its eyes glowing with a malice that was beyond comprehension. "I see you've come, Voidborn," the entity's voice resonated through the chamber. "You are too late. The galaxy will fall, and with it all that you hold dear. You cannot stop me." Kalen's hand tightened around his weapon, but he knew that weapons alone would not suffice. They were dealing with something beyond anything he could fight with conventional means. "Ilara, we have to destroy it," Kalen said, his voice resolute. "We need to destroy the core. It's the only way to stop this madness." Ilara shook her head weakly. "The core? It's no longer just a prison. It's a conduit, for its power. If we destroy it now, we'll be caught in the blast. The entire galaxy might." "We don't have a choice," Kalen interrupted. "We either end this now or we all die. We have to break its connection to the core." It's the only way to stop the entity from unraveling everything. Kalen turned his gaze to the dark being before them. You can destroy the galaxy, but you will not destroy us. We are the Voidborn. And we will fight until the very last breath. The entity let out a cruel laugh, its voice shaking the chamber. You think you can resist me? I am the beginning and the end. I am the Unmaker. Kalen's heart raced as he made his decision. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle to ensure that the light of the stars would never be snuffed out. With one last glance at Alara, he activated the detonation sequence. The battle for the galaxy was about to reach its final, most desperate stage. And in the heart of the storm, everything would either end or begin anew. The darkness closed in, suffocating the last remnants of light from the shattered city of Xanthoria. The skies above had turned black, thick with the presence of the ancient entity, the Unmaker, whose power seemed to seep into every molecule of existence. The pulse of the core, once a beacon of energy, now radiated a deathly glow, resonating with the entity's malevolent influence. Every crack in the city's crystalline structures seemed to tremble with the entity's rising power, and Kalen knew they were on the precipice of the galaxy's destruction. Alara, get to the control terminal, Kalen barked, his voice cutting through the weight of the moment. We don't have much time. Alara, still recovering from the psychic barrage, nodded weakly. Her eyes, though dimmed by the entity's overwhelming presence, shone with determination. She had been with Kalen through countless battles, but this was different. This was not a war they could win with weapons or tactics alone. They were fighting against an ancient force that had no place in the galaxy, something that could unmake reality itself. The Voidborn fleet had set down in the center of the ruined city, their warships' engines flickering in the dark storm. But they too were useless against the Unmaker. It was not just a battle for survival. It was a fight for existence. For a future where stars would burn, where civilizations would rise and fall in the ordinary flow of time. Kalen knew that only one thing could stop this, the destruction of the core. But even as he made his way toward the heart of the chamber, where the twisted figure of the Unmaker stood, he knew that doing so would come at a terrible cost. I will not let you do this, the Unmaker's voice echoed through the chamber, its words both a threat and a promise. Its form writhed and twisted, made from shadows and void, its outline constantly shifting as if it were both present and absent all at once. It was as though it existed beyond space and time itself, and yet it was here, within their grasp. You have already lost, Kalen said, his voice steady despite the terror creeping into his heart. The Voidborn do not surrender. We do not bend to forces like you. The Unmaker laughed, a sound that seemed to reach into Kalen's very soul. You speak of defiance, but you do not understand. You do not understand what you are facing. I have existed since before the first star burned. You are nothing but a speck in the great cycle. And when I am done, there will be nothing but the endless void. The Unmaker's influence had already begun to warp the space around them. The air itself seemed to bend and twist as reality itself was slowly becoming undone. Kalen could feel it pressing in on him, pulling at his thoughts, distorting the very fabric of time. It was as though the universe itself was buckling under the weight of the entity's power. Alara reached the control terminal, her fingers flying over the buttons despite her weakened state. The terminal, a relic of the Zethers' psychic technology, was linked directly to the core. She could feel the power pulsing through it, ancient and unyielding. With every touch of the keys, the terminal responded, opening up access to the core's intricate systems. But she could also feel the entity fighting her, pushing back against her every move. Alara. Kalen shouted as the Unmaker's power surged toward her, a wave of psychic energy that threatened to overwhelm them both. But Alara held firm, her resolve unshaken. I'm almost there, Kalen, she gasped, sweat trickling down her forehead as she worked against the growing pressure. The core, it's connected to the entity. If we sever the connection, we can destabilize it. But how do we destroy it? Kalen asked, his voice grim. The entity was growing stronger with every passing second, its tendrils of power lashing out, threatening to tear them apart. I'm working on it. Alara snapped, her voice tinged with desperation. Suddenly, the Unmaker's form loomed closer, its shadowy presence filling the chamber like a dark cloud. It reached out, tendrils of darkness extending toward Alara, seeking to break her concentration. The air crackled with a searing energy as it pressed against her, trying to crush her will. But Alara's focus never wavered. The light in her eyes burned bright, undimmed by the oppressive darkness surrounding her. I will not let you win, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She slammed her hand down onto the final key. The ground trembled as a massive shockwave rippled through the chamber. The core's power began to destabilize, its once stable energy field fracturing. The crystal itself seemed to scream as it fought against the rupture. The Unmaker recoiled, a wave of rage washing over its form. "No. You cannot do this," it howled, its voice filled with a wrath that shook the very foundation of Xanthoria. Kalen rushed toward Alara, his hand outstretched as he pulled her away from the terminal. The final connection had been severed, and the core's energy began to pulse violently, sending shockwaves of destructive force throughout the city. The entire structure of Xanthoria began to collapse, the once glorious crystal towers crumbling into the abyss below. "We need to get out of here," Kalen shouted. "Now." Alara stumbled to her feet, still weak from the psychic barrage but alive. They ran toward the entrance of the chamber, but the Unmaker was not done yet. With a scream of fury, it reached out with a surge of dark power, warping space itself as it tried to hold them in place. Kalen's mind raced. He couldn't let the Unmaker follow them. He couldn't let the galaxy fall into the hands of this ancient force. There had to be a way to finish it, once and for all. With a flash of realization, Kalen turned back toward the core. "Alara, we can't just escape. We need to trigger the full collapse. If we destroy the core completely, we can sever the Unmaker's connection to reality. We must end it here." "But the blast, it'll destroy everything," Alara cried. "Everything is already lost unless we do this," Kalen said, his voice resolute. "We can stop it, but we have to act now." Kalen and Alara exchanged a single, determined look. There was no time for second thoughts. They had come too far. The galaxy's fate now rested in their hands. With every ounce of strength, Alara pressed the final sequence into the terminal, initiating the final shutdown. A blinding explosion of light erupted from the core, engulfing everything in its path. As the chamber collapsed and the entity screamed in agony, the galaxy's future hung in the balance. The Unmaker had been undone, but at what cost? Would the galaxy survive the destruction of Xanthoria? Would the Voidborn live to fight another day? The light of the stars flickered as the last echoes of the explosion reverberated through the darkened sky. The universe would never be the same again. And Kalen, standing on the brink of annihilation, knew that the fight for the galaxy's future was far from over. "You said." The shockwave from the explosion radiated outward, and the fabric of reality itself seemed to bend under the sheer force of the blast. For a brief moment, the universe stood still, as though it were holding its breath. Then, like a violent storm crashing over a calm sea, the world around Kalen and Alara shattered. The chamber where the core had once pulsed with the dark energy of the Unmaker was now nothing but a void, an empty cavern of broken crystals and fractured earth. Xanthoria, once a planet of unimaginable beauty and ancient power, was now a shell of its former self, its vast crystal city collapsing into the abyss below. Alara, leaning heavily on Kalen for support, coughed weakly. The dust was thick in the air, and the vibrations beneath their feet were a constant reminder of the destruction that had just transpired. But amid the ruins, the one thing they could feel was the absence of the entity. The oppressive weight that had filled the planet was gone. Kalen stared into the remnants of the core, his eyes narrowed. "It's over. The Unmaker is gone." "Not gone," Alara replied, her voice hoarse. "It's been severed. The connection to the galaxy is broken. But the damage is done. Xanthoria, the Xether. None of this will ever be the same." There was no time to mourn. The consequences of the battle were far-reaching, and Kalen knew the Voidborn had no luxury to waste on grief. As the Voidborn fleet's warships loomed above the horizon, their engines flickering in the distant sky, Kalen turned his gaze toward the remnants of Xanthoria, the once proud jewel of the Xether. "We need to return to the fleet," Kalen said, his voice commanding despite the chaos. "We must ensure that what remains of the galaxy is stable. If the Unmaker was truly imprisoned here, then there's more to this war than we've seen." Alara nodded, though her expression was grim. She understood that the battle against the Unmaker was only one piece of the puzzle. The destruction they had witnessed was only the beginning. The Unmaker had been ancient, yes, but there were still forces more insidious and calculating, that would rise in the vacuum left behind. The Vortex Reaver was waiting for them, its sleek form hovering in the distance. Kalen activated the communications link to the fleet, his voice steady as he ordered the ships to move into position. "Prepare for the next phase of the mission," he said. "The Unmaker may be gone, but there are other threats in the galaxy. We need to re-establish contact with the surviving civilizations and ensure that no other forces seek to exploit this moment of chaos. We will rebuild, but we must remain vigilant." Ilara joined him on the ship, and as they ascended through the shattered atmosphere of Xanthoria, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that this battle had only unlocked a much larger war. The galaxy had survived, but it had been irrevocably changed. The Zethar were no longer the only players, and other forces were already gathering in the shadows. As the Voidborn fleet departed Xanthoria's dying orbit, the stars themselves seemed to burn brighter, more fragile, than ever before. The galaxy had been given a second chance, but it was one that came at a terrible cost. Xanthoria was lost, its ancient power torn asunder, but the knowledge of what had once been locked away in its crystal heart was now scattered among the survivors. The stars above flickered, as if uncertain of their place in the wake of the Unmaker's fall. Kalen turned to Ilara, his expression hard but resolute. "The galaxy will rebuild," he said, "but it will not be the same. The darkness we fought has been banished, but its echoes will be felt for generations. The Voidborn will have to stand stronger than ever before. And we will lead them." Ilara met his gaze, her eyes burning with the same fire that had driven them both to this moment. "We'll rebuild, Kalen. And we'll fight. Together." Kalen's lips curled into a faint smile, his mind already racing with the challenges ahead. "Together," he agreed. The vortex reaver broke through the shattered remnants of the atmosphere, and as they looked out over the swirling abyss of space, Kalen knew that this war was far from over. The galaxy had been saved, but new battles were already on the horizon. Battles that would define the future of everything. The endless war was not over, but now, it had a new purpose. The Voidborn would not only fight to survive, they would fight to reshape the destiny of all. And as the stars gleamed above them, Kalen and Ilara both understood the truth. They were no longer just fighting to protect the galaxy, they were fighting for its future. The galaxy's destiny had been written in blood and shadow, but now, it would be theirs to shape.